And my guest tonight is a true political maverick. Rarely out of trouble, this fearless and opinionated politician has been one of the most high-profile Brexit-supporting figures in the country, as the UK Independence Party's MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber for a decade, between 2004 and 2014. He has strong views on climate change and even got in hot water for once jokingly referring to his female audience members as sluts. Godfrey Bloom has had a successful career in the city and served the Territorial Army with distinction for decades until he stepped down in 1996. Sometimes controversial, never boring. I'm delighted to welcome Godfrey Bloom. Hello, Godfrey.
Well, good evening and thank you very much.
What a life, what a career.
Well, it's certainly been mixed, hasn't it? The city, a bit of the army, a bit of politics, a rather nice mix, I think. And perhaps one of your emailers earlier on the Labour Party saying that none of them done a real job. Well, I think I've done a few jobs in my life, so I can't be included as one of those politicians, I think.
Absolutely. Godfrey, why did you bother with politics? There's no money in it.
Well, I've never been involved in politics at all. I've never been a member of a political party, ever. But I feel very strongly about Brexit. And so I went into politics for Brexit and for no other reason. And that's why I went in. That's why I stuck with it. I enjoyed some of it, a bit like the curate's egg. It was good in parts. But now we've achieved Brexit of a sort. And I think perhaps if you'd asked me 25 years ago when I started the Brexit fight, would I have gone with what we've got today? And I would have probably said yes.
Yes, I think many Brexiteers feel that way. Why did you become a Eurosceptic?
Well, funnily enough, I was working for a very, very big city house, and I was managing fixed interest, which is rather unglamorous in the city, as you probably know. All the glamour boys and girls were in equities, and I was boring fixed interest because I broadly managed pension funds. But I was asked to put my team, I had a very talented team, I have to say rather more talented than I was, to have a look at what was called then the common currency, or we later called it the euro, the common currency, so on and so forth. And I was asked to speak at Cambridge University and places on this to give a city view. And it didn't take me very long to see that it really couldn't work with such a disparate amount of economies in Europe, Germany and Portugal all being meshed together in the same currency. So I then came against that, and I knew that was going to be a mistake, and I dug a little bit deeper, and I looked at the constitutional aspects of our membership, the abandonment of the principles of English law for corpus juris, various other things, decision-making process, the sovereignty of Parliament, so on and so forth, and that led me down the Brexit path quite firmly, and I stuck with it.
And clearly, you're cautiously optimistic about the deal that the Prime Minister struck, and that, of course, was negotiated with the European Union. We have control of our money, our laws and our borders. Free movement is gone. Leaving the European Union is an insurance policy against ever having the euro or being signed up to a European army. So those are the positives. What are the negatives of the deal Boris has brokered?
Well, the negatives that we have, not going down the Northern Ireland route, because that's too complex for a programme like this.
Was it a mistake to make that concession of an investment board down the Irish Sea?
We have to bear in mind that the negotiation was by civil servants who wanted to remain. And a political a cabinet at the time who wanted to remain, Theresa May wanted to remain, the political feeling in both houses of the Commons and the Lords wanted to remain. So they negotiated a pretty lousy deal. And imagine trotting a 15 out at Twickenham to play Wales with 15 Englishmen who didn't really want to win. And that's really where we are. So we're still paying them £20 billion a year, extraordinary, and we still haven't started to unravel all the ghastly legislation that we're stuck with, one of which has come home to bite us at the moment, and that, of course, is the drivers for petrol tankers, petrol Bowser tankers. All the regulations come from Europe. The reason it takes so long and it's so expensive to become a Bowser driver is because of European regulation. We haven't unscrambled these. We must start unscrambling the last 40 years of absolute nonsense that's spewed out of the European Union. So we're really, at the moment, we're no much more than an associate member of the European Union. We're not completely detached. And there's an awful lot of financial implications that people don't yet know about, which will come to the fore in the next year or two.
Are you optimistic about the long term for global Britain? Do you think that these teething problems will be resolved?
Well, I do hope so. I was always slightly sceptical throughout my Brexit campaign of the last 20 or 25 years that we would exchange Brussels and Strasbourg for Whitehall. And of course, to quote the great Lord Salisbury in 1890, the greatest Conservative Prime Minister we've ever had, Whitehall will always make business for itself. We still have 1,000 quangos. We are over-regulated, we're overtaxed, and we're overmanaged. And still we start actually getting a new philosophical look at life, we're not going to get the full benefit of Brexit that I would like to see.
Now, you spent a decade in the European Parliament as the UKIP MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber, but you fell out with UKIP. What went wrong?
Well, in my mind, I saw UKIP drifting away from its grassroots. The great strength of UKIP was that it was a grassroots party. It represented the man in the pub, the ordinary working Joe, which has now been politically abandoned. And it seemed to me towards the end, round about 2013 and 14, UKIP had started to become politically correct. And that's something that I obviously couldn't cope with because I'm well known not to be politically correct. So it wasn't the party for me. But I wished it well, and I went my own way, and I think that was the right thing to do, and no hard feelings.
Are you a Conservative at heart?
No, I once debated at Durham University with Jacob Rees-Mogg, and he was proposing the motion at Durham that the future was Conservative. And I countered his argument in opposition that this House believed that the better way was classical liberalism. I'm a classical liberal. Not in the American sense of being a liberal, but in the Gladstonian sense. And I'm happy to say that Durham University saw it my way, and I beat Jacob Rees-Mogg in the debate.
And how would you define a liberal? As you said, in America, that effectively means you're a socialist. But in this country, it's a libertarian, isn't it? So what are the principles of being a liberal?
Well, I lecture at universities and various places when I'm not deplatformed, which I sadly am quite a lot at the moment. I believe in the Austrian school of economics, the Austrian school. And to sort of put that into sort of easy words, easy to understand, it means I don't really want government to have anything to do with me at all. Every single problem that every family faces today has been caused by politicians and government. If you track it down, that is the core root of almost everybody's problems, whether it's immigration, whether it's tax, whether it's the problem we have at the moment with no deliveries of petrol. It all comes down to incompetent politicians, none of whom seem to know what they're doing. What the Austrian school and Libertarian says is, please leave us alone. And again, if I may quote Lord Salisbury, again in about 1890, he said the business of Parliament is to facilitate the natural entrepreneurial spirit of the British people. That is the role of government, not to micromanage us. Please leave us alone, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, which are 80% of the economy, to get on with our lives and leave us in peace. Broadly speaking, that's libertarianism.
Can Boris Johnson reasonably call himself a liberal or a libertarian?
Well, not really, can he? I mean, we've had a year. We've been locked in our homes against a virus which is yet to be detected, which has, by the government's own admission, a 99.9% recovery rate for people fit and healthy. And he's locked us all in our house. He's closed business. He's closed pubs. How can you possibly call yourself a libertarian? Do you know, I quote Boris Johnson, that pubs aren't a necessary service? Well, the average working Joe doesn't believe that for a minute. Without pubs, our communities break up. It's a very British thing. No, he's not a libertarian. He's a control freak, and I'm afraid his cabinet are full of control freaks, and they're the ones that we elected. We now find we're governed by people that we've never elected, never even heard of. Chris Whitty, for example, who believes that we should be vaccinating our children. There's all sorts of things which have got nothing to do with libertarianism at all. It's really quite frightening.
I tend to agree with you, and as far as I'm concerned, pubs are essential. They are the fourth emergency service in my book, Godfrey. So many emails coming in, lots of plaudits heading in your direction. This is David, who has emailed the programme. Thank you for your message, David. Godfrey, you've spoken a lot about quantitative easing by the Bank of England. That's, of course, digitally printing money, and its impact on inflated asset prices and widening wealth gaps. Do you see it continuing, normalising, or ending badly?
It must end badly. You can't print money ad infinitum without degrading money. You then lose the value of money. The people without assets or the people on fixed incomes suffer because you have inflation. You have asset price inflation at the moment, and sometimes the term is Wall Street. Well, Wall Street assets are inflated, but it hasn't got to Main Street. But it's coming down Main Street. And most people watching this programme tonight will know that inflation is already hitting them. Prices of almost everything are going up. And that's because we've been printing money. I bought a house in London for £6,000 in 1972, 3 times income. I worked for a city house, put down £500 deposit. My nephew was an underwriter at Lloyd's, 30, fully qualified, can't dream of buying his own place, and that's because of asset price inflation. So the government pretend there's only 1 or 2% or at best 3% inflation. Not if you're buying a house, but they don't put the house in the equation. So degrading money, printing money. And of course, if you did that in the 1400s by degrading coinage or clipping coins or putting alloy into coins, the punishment was to have your hands chopped off. So I would like to see the governor of the Bank of England contemplate having his hands chopped off, and of course the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who supports this kind of behaviour.
How do you see the economy playing out post-pandemic, assuming there are no further lockdowns? Are you optimistic for the future of the British economy, or is a crash coming?
Well, a crash is definitely coming. There's no way we can avoid a crash now unless we do some very radical things. One of the biggest problems that we have in this country, and it accounts for something like sort of 700 or 800 billion pounds of our national debt, is index-linked pensions in the public sector. They've died in the private sector, and I used to manage pension funds in the city for nearly 40 years. This is costing a fortune. Your rates are going up, your taxes are going up because of unfunded index-linked pensions in the public sector. So that is something, it's a major thing we need to get rid of. We have 1,000 quangos. We need to get rid of those. And we need to start thinking about government waste. And the role of government. Nobody at the moment is challenging the role of government, whether we're too fat, whether we eat chips, whether we smoke, whether we go to the pub. This is not the business of government. This is not the business of government. And the government needs to step back, and then they wouldn't be soaking up so much of our money. And money from the public sector doesn't go into the economy. One has to understand, and they don't understand this, academic economists, because they're part of the problem. Public spending takes money out of the economy. It doesn't put it in. And until the government understand that, and they don't, and they haven't done for decades, this problem isn't going to go away.
And what might a crash look like?
It will start with the collapse in bond prices. We have zero or negative yields on bonds, so they are grossly overvalued. They have to go. They'll have to fall. They'll drag down equities as well. And people who imagine that they're safe, perhaps with perhaps property, of course, a lot of property is geared as well. Agricultural property, domestic property, residential property, what the Americans call real estate, is largely geared. So we will see a crash in that as well, I suspect. And I saw that in 1970. There's only one advantage to being an old geezer like me. I've seen it all before. I saw it in 73, I saw it in 89, and it's coming down the road again.
Let's talk about your pal, Nigel Farage, of course, hosts a very successful, popular, well-watched programme here on GB News called Farage, 7 p.m. Monday through to Thursday, with a highlight show on a Friday. And I know he's a fan of yours, but he said the trouble with Godfrey is that he's not an extremist or any of those things. He's not even anti-women, but he has a sort of rather old-fashioned territorial army sense of humour, which does not translate very well in modern Britain. You got in slightly hot water for making a joke at an event in which you referred to females in the audience as slags. Tell me more.
No, I didn't. Sluts.
Oh, sluts, forgive me.
Not slags. In the north of England, up here in Yorkshire, a slut means a lazy woman, and the joke was they said, one of the speakers, female speakers, says, "I don't clean behind the fridge," and some of the girls laughed, and I said, "Oh, it's full of sluts." Everybody laughed, including the then Mrs. Farage, everybody in the room, and if you listen to the clip, it was full of females laughing. But this is the problem. When it was becoming politically correct, it became a stick to beat me with, and even you have misquoted me. It wasn't slags, it was sluts.
And you'll have to
And of course, the definition of slut. No, I do, of course, there's no problem. It's just that the definition of slut in Yorkshire is somebody who doesn't clean the front doorstep. It's a completely different thing.
So your joke was actually a joke about how some people in this audience are work shy. That was the gag.
Yeah, yes, that was it. And everybody laughed. Nobody went, "Oh, shock, horror." Everybody laughed. And so whether this is popular or not, let me just say that I don't want to sound in any way arrogant, but I was the voice of UKIP in Yorkshire for 10 years in North Lincolnshire. And we went, the last vote in 2014 was over 400,000 votes. Up here in Yorkshire, they don't really watch Question Time and all that kind of thing. I was the voice, and I was talking for the ordinary working Joe, and that's where Yorkshire Brexit votes came from, and it's still a very strong Brexit place today. Don't tell me about not knowing how to get elected. I know how to get elected. I was very successful at getting elected. Now, of course, Nigel comes down from the southeast. You know, he's down in Kent, where they take a different view of these matters.
I want to put a question to you, and by the way, thank you for that correction, and that was an error on my part, slut versus slag, and somebody that has performed for many years as a comedian, I know the crucial difference between one word or another when you're making a joke. It raises a wider question about cancel culture, doesn't it, and the fact that people see their careers ended for a joke or a politically incorrect remark. What's your attitude to the culture wars, to extreme political correctness?
Well, it's a worry. I was invited by the members of the Cambridge University Conservative Association to speak after dinner last year, and my theme was the administration and the government of Lord Salisbury, which I'm a great hero, because he was a conservative libertarian, and they're not incompatible. And I was going, and the do was going to be at Robinson College, and I was banned by the faculty. So they had to call it off at the last minute because they couldn't guarantee the safety of the undergraduates at Cambridge. If you ever heard anything as absurd, I was deplatformed at Stirling University because I was going to give a lecture on how Scotland could become independent economically successfully if they adopted Austrian school economics. I was deplatformed because they didn't know what I might say. You introduced me and very, very nicely. You said, Godfrey, a controversial politician. Well, you see, I'm not controversial at all. I'm a radical, certainly. I'm a radical. And of course, I've had a dig at overseas aid. because people don't fully understand numbers, and I'm a boring geek. I do numbers for a living. The government has committed to give round about 0.75% of GDP in overseas aid, okay, which doesn't sound very much. But if our GDP growth for last year was only going to be 2%, think about it, we're giving nearly half our growth in GDP, we're sending abroad worse, unaudited. Unaudited. So, although my wife says the trouble is you're always right about these matters, which is why you've got no friends.
Well, listen, you'll never be deplatformed here at GB News. It's all about opinions, Godfrey. It's been a fascinating conversation. Really rapid fire. We've only got a minute left. I got a very interesting and short question from one particular viewer. It's a personal question, so don't feel that you've got to answer it. And it's from Finley. And Finley asks, who did you vote for in the last general election?
I haven't voted for years. I couldn't bear the responsibility of putting people like Boris Johnson and Theresa May and the rest of them in government. So I keep my head down and don't vote. It only encourages them.
That's a great line. And how about this? By the way, it's from Alex. Let's make this the final question, Godfrey. Alex says, Dear Mark, excellent to have Godfrey Bloom on your show. Do have him on again, please. Could you please ask Godfrey, to whom should the politically homeless small c Conservatives turn to at the next election?
It's an appallingly difficult question, but I was the guest speaker after dinner last night at the English Democrats. And I'm not a member of the English Democrats, but I will say one thing. They were like the old members of UKIP, very charming people and deeply patriotic. And that reflects their party. So if you want a real patriotic party, if there's somebody standing for them, it's worth a go. It's worth a go.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.